on a distant planet, surrounded by vast mountains and an endless sky, Captain Rian Garrow had found peace. After many years as a soldier in the Threxian Empire's military, he had retired to a quiet life. He had bought a small ranch far from the noise of war, where he spent his days tending to cattle and enjoying the quiet solitude that came with it. Life was simple, predictable, and Rian had no complaints. He was far away from the chaos that had once defined his world. But one morning, everything changed. Rian stood outside his small home, staring out across the dry plains as the sun slowly rose. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, a peaceful scene that gave him a sense of calm. He adjusted his hat and turned to go back inside when he saw the sleek silver ship descending in the distance. It was unlike any ship he had ever seen. The design was elegant, almost regal, with smooth curves and an aura of power. As it landed softly in the grass near his house, Rian felt a strange sense of unease. No one ever came out this far. The ramp of the ship lowered, and from it descended a woman unlike any Rian had ever met. She was tall, with dark flowing hair that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Her attire was a flowing royal gown, adorned with intricate patterns that sparkled faintly in the sun. Rian knew immediately who she was: Queen Selora of the Threxian Empire. She had the air of someone who carried the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders, and yet her movements were graceful, almost like she was floating above the earth. Rian stood frozen for a moment, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster on his hip. It had been years since he had needed to use it, but something about this woman, this queen, made him uneasy. But before he could make a move, Queen Selora's gaze met his, and a small smile appeared on her face. "I didn't expect you to be so far out," she said in a voice that was both commanding and soothing. "I didn't expect anyone to be out here at all," Rian replied, his voice rough from disuse. "What brings you to my doorstep, Your Majesty?" "I have a request, Captain Garrow," she said, her tone suddenly more serious. "A request that may be more of an order." He stood there, waiting for her to continue. "I am about to leave for a galactic campaign. My people are at war, and I must lead them. But there is something I must do before I leave. Something that cannot wait." She paused for a moment, as if considering her next words carefully. "I need you to take care of my daughters while I am gone." Rian's brow furrowed. "Your daughters?" The Queen nodded.
"Yes, Princess Mira and Princess Lina."
"They are unique. They need someone to protect them while I am away." "You are the only one I trust to do this." Rian felt a lump form in his throat. He had not asked for this. He had not asked for anything but a quiet life. And yet, here was the Queen, placing her most precious belongings, her daughters, into his hands. He had known her only by reputation, but he could see the weight of responsibility in her eyes. She was not asking, she was commanding. Before Rian could respond, two young women emerged from the ship. The first was tall and athletic, with striking green eyes and long, dark hair that seemed to catch the light. The second was smaller, more reserved, with soft features and a quiet intensity in her blue eyes. Both of them were dressed in elegant clothes, but their posture told Rian everything he needed to know. They were royalty. "These are my daughters," Queen Selora said, her voice softening as she looked at them. "Mira and Lyanna." Rian glanced between them, feeling a sense of unease rise in his chest. He had spent years alone, living in peace. He had never thought he would have to take on the responsibility of two young women, especially not royalty. He didn't know how to protect them. He didn't know how to care for them. He had no idea what kind of dangers they were facing, or what kind of training they had received. "You will take care of them," the Queen said firmly. "I expect nothing less." The Queen's eyes met Rian's once again, and in them he saw something more than command. He saw the weight of an empire. He saw desperation. "I expect grandchildren when I return," she said, the words surprising him with their suddenness. "I will be gone for years, but when I return, I expect you to have given me grandchildren." He had no idea how to respond to that. The Queen had just entrusted him with her daughters, and now she was asking for something far beyond what he could have imagined. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Before he could find his voice, the Queen turned to the ship, her cape flowing behind her as she walked toward it. "Take care of him, Captain," she said over her shoulder. "I will be back when the war is won." With that, she boarded the ship and it lifted off into the sky, disappearing into the distance. Rian stood there, stunned. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He had been handed responsibility he had not asked for. He had been left with 2 young women and a command from a queen he barely knew. Mira and Liana stood silently, watching him. Rian felt the weight of their gaze, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of unease. These were no ordinary women. There was something about them, something powerful, that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Ryan cleared his throat, trying to shake off his nerves. He had to remain calm, even though his world had just been turned upside down. He needed to protect them. He needed to keep them safe just as the Queen had asked. He turned to them and nodded. "All right, then. Let's get started." As he led them inside, he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. He had no idea what kind of challenges they would face, but he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. Rian stood at the door, his hands resting on the wooden frame, staring out at the endless fields that stretched before him. It had been 2 days since Queen Salora had left with her promise to return after the war. 2 days since he had become the reluctant guardian of the 2 royal princesses, Mira and Lion. He had spent these 2 days trying to adjust to the new reality, to the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the plains. Rian had always liked this time of day, the quiet before the night. But today, it seemed different. The quiet felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. The air was thick with tension, and he wasn't sure why. Inside the house, Mira and Liana were adjusting to their new life. They had arrived with nothing but their clothes and a few small belongings. Rian had given them the 2 spare rooms in the house, though he knew it would take time for them to feel at home. The royal life they had known, full of luxury and constant attention, was far removed from the simple ranch life they now found themselves in. Mira was the older of the 2. Tall and strong, with sharp features and dark, intense eyes. She had the look of someone who was used to taking charge, someone who had always been in control. But now, as she sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a leather-bound book, Rian could see that she wasn't as confident as she appeared. She was out of place, and she knew it. Liana, on the other hand, was quieter. She had the same dark hair as her sister, but her eyes were softer, a calm blue that seemed to look right through Rian. She had spent most of her time sitting by the window, staring out at the fields, as if lost in thought. Her presence was serene, almost otherworldly, but Rian couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. There was something about her, something hidden behind those soft eyes, that made him uneasy. It was only on the 3rd day, when Rian decided it was time for them to begin their training, that he began to understand just how different their lives had become.
"All right," Rian said, his voice steady as he stood in front of the 2 princesses. "You're going to learn how to survive out here. No more pampered life, no more royal treatment.
Out here, you'll have to fend for yourselves. I'll teach you the basics, how to hunt, how to defend yourselves, how to work the land." Mira stood up immediately, her eyes flashing with determination. "I've been trained in combat," she said firmly, her voice strong. "I can handle myself. Just show me how to fight." Liana, however, remained seated, her gaze still fixed on the window. She didn't seem to hear Rian's words, or if she did, she didn't react. It was clear that she was struggling to come to terms with this new life. Rian could see the tension in Mira's body. She was eager, ready to prove herself. But there was something raw and untamed in her that worried him. She was strong, but without control. That strength could be dangerous. He could already sense that she had a temper. One that could easily spiral out of control if provoked. "First, you need to learn how to use your strength wisely," Rian said, turning to Mira. "Your power is a tool, not a weapon.
If you let it control you, it will lead to nothing but trouble."
Mira narrowed her eyes. "I know what I'm doing," she muttered under her breath. But Rian heard it. He didn't respond, but he knew that her pride would be the first obstacle they had to overcome. "Liana," Rian said, his voice softer as he turned to the younger princess. "Are you ready to start?" Liana turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. For a moment, Rian thought she was going to refuse, but then she stood up, her movements graceful and calm. She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet resignation. "I don't know how to survive out here," Liana said quietly. "I've never had to. That's why we're starting with the basics." Over the next few weeks, Rian worked with the princesses every day, teaching them the survival skills they would need to live in the wilderness. He showed them how to build a fire, how to hunt for food, how to navigate the land. Mira excelled quickly, her strength making her a natural at physical tasks. She could carry heavy loads without breaking a sweat, and her speed in the forest was unmatched, but she was still struggling to control her temper. Rian had seen her accidentally knock over a pile of firewood with a single punch, her frustration boiling over when things didn't go her way. It was Liana, though, who surprised him. Despite her quiet nature, she had a remarkable ability to learn quickly. She wasn't as physically strong as her sister, but her mind was sharp. She took to the practical aspects of survival like a fish to water. She was the one who figured out how to use herbs and plants to treat injuries. Her knowledge of the natural world far greater than Rian had expected. But it wasn't just the physical training that worried Rian. There were moments when he would catch them both staring off into the distance, lost in thought. Their past life seemed to haunt them, even in the quiet of the ranch. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Rian asked them about their home, the empire they had come from. Mira was the first to speak. "Life was easy," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Too easy. We were sheltered from everything. I never knew what real hardship was until I came here."
Rian nodded, understanding. "It's different here."
"No one is going to do things for you." Liana spoke up quietly. "I miss the palace. I miss the comfort, the feeling of being important." Rian felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had known a life of luxury, of power, and now she was here, far from everything she had ever known. It was a difficult adjustment, and though she didn't say it aloud, Rian could see the sadness in her eyes. "You'll get used to it," he said softly. "But it's not going to be easy. It never is." The weeks turned into months, and still, Rian could sense the growing unease in both of them. Mira had learned to control her strength, though not without effort. Liana, too, was becoming more skilled with each passing day, her quiet resolve making her a valuable student. But Rian could see the underlying tension between them. They were both young, and neither of them had fully come to terms with the life they now found themselves living. One day, as they were out hunting in the woods, Rian noticed something strange. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. Mira stopped in her tracks, her eyes scanning the trees. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice tense. Rian listened carefully. In the distance, there was a sound, a low hum, like something was moving through the trees. He frowned and motioned for them to stay quiet. He moved cautiously, his hand on the blaster at his side. They weren't alone. Suddenly, a rustling noise broke the silence, and a figure emerged from the trees. It was a man, dressed in dark, tattered clothing, his face hidden beneath a hood. He looked lost, disoriented. And when he saw Rian and the princesses, he froze. "Who are you?" Rian asked, his voice low and cautious. The man took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. I'm just trying to survive," he said, his voice shaky. "Please don't hurt me." Rian didn't lower his guard. "What are you doing out here?" I was looking for food," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to intrude. I didn't know anyone lived here." Rian studied him for a moment, then glanced at Mira and Liana. There was something about the man that made Rian uneasy. But there was also something else, a kind of desperation that he recognized. "Go back to where you came from," Rian said finally, his voice hard. "And don't come back." The man nodded quickly and disappeared into the trees without a word. Rian stood still for a moment, his eyes scanning the forest. "You never know who you'll run into out here," Rian said, turning to the princesses. "Remember that." The moment passed, but the unease lingered. Rian couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The days were growing colder and the nights longer. Ryan had watched the seasons change, but something within him remained unsettled. The feeling of unease he had sensed months ago, when the princesses first arrived, had never left him. The quiet had turned into a constant hum in the back of his mind. His days were spent working with Mira and Liana, teaching them the skills they would need to survive. But at night, as the winds howled outside the walls of the small ranch house, Rian found himself lying awake, his thoughts racing. He had never expected his life to take such a drastic turn. One day he had been living quietly tending to his cattle. The next, he was a protector of 2 royal princesses with a mysterious past and strange abilities. Mira's strength, once uncontrollable, had become more refined under his training. She had learned to harness her power and use it for practical purposes, though Rian could still sense that she was eager to prove herself, always testing her limits. Liana, on the other hand, was more reserved. She had taken to her training quietly, absorbing everything with a calm focus. Yet there was a distance in her eyes that Rian couldn't ignore. It was as if she was still trapped between the world she had known and the one she was now forced to live in. One evening, as Rian finished preparing dinner, he saw Mira standing at the window, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows, and the orange glow painted the sky in shades of fire and gold. Rian watched her for a moment, sensing that something was wrong. "Everything all right?" he asked, stepping up behind her. Mira didn't respond immediately, her eyes still locked on the horizon. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "There's something out there, Captain. Something watching us." Rian furrowed his brow. He had grown used to Mira's sharp instincts, but this felt different. He had heard the rumors, the stories of rogue factions and dangerous mercenaries who roamed the outer reaches of the galaxy, but he had hoped they would be left behind in the war. This far out in the wilderness, he had believed they would be safe. Yet Mira's intuition was rarely wrong. "Are you sure?" he asked, stepping beside her to get a better view. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, but there was a sharp edge to it now, a bitter chill that didn't belong. Mira's eyes scanned the land, her hand tightening around the edge of the window frame. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet intensity. "I've been feeling it for days. We're not alone." Rian nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't deny it anymore. The world he had built for the princesses, a peaceful life far from the war, was starting to unravel. Something was coming, and it wasn't just the changing seasons. That night, as the wind picked up and the darkness fell over the land, Rian gathered the princesses around the fire inside the house. They sat together, the warmth from the flames flickering in their eyes, casting long shadows on the walls. "We need to talk," Rian said, his voice serious. "There's something out there,"
Mira's instincts are rarely wrong, and I believe we're being watched.
We need to be ready. Mira looked at him, her expression unreadable. What do you suggest we do? Rian paused, his mind calculating the risks. We start by securing the house.
We'll need to set up defenses, in case they come for us. We can't afford to be caught off guard.
Liana, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What if they're here for us? For me? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the fear in it was evident. Rian turned to her, his gaze softening.
They might be. You and your sister are royal.
There are people who want to use you for their own purposes. Mira clenched her fists. We won't let them. Rian nodded, his expression grim. No, we won't. But we need to be smart about this. We'll train harder. We'll be ready. I'm not going to let anyone take you. The next few days were spent preparing for the unknown. Rian worked with both princesses, honing their skills. Mira's strength was a natural asset, but she had to learn how to control it, how to fight without causing destruction. Liana, though not as physically powerful, had an uncanny ability to sense things before they happened. Rian trained her in using her instincts to guide her in combat, teaching her how to anticipate movements and react with precision. By the end of the week, Rian had set up traps around the ranch, hidden in the thick trees and tall grass that bordered the property. He had also reinforced the house, making sure there were no easy points of entry. Every night they took turns keeping watch, the silence of the wilderness broken only by the howling winds and the occasional crackle of the fire. But despite their preparations, the feeling of unease never left Rian. It hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to burst at any moment. Then, one night, it happened. Rian was sitting by the fire, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the house, when he heard it. A faint rustling in the bushes. He stiffened, his hand reaching for his blaster instinctively. Mira and Liana were inside, waiting, ready for whatever might come. Rian motioned for them to stay back and moved toward the sound. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Rian crept forward, his boots barely making a sound as he moved through the tall grass. His eyes searched the darkness, but all he could hear was the soft whisper of the wind. Then, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Rian's hand moved quickly to his blaster, but the figure raised their hands in a peaceful gesture. I mean no harm, the stranger said, their voice low and gravelly. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a hooded cloak that hid most of his face. He stood still, watching Rian with wary eyes. I just need help. Rian didn't lower his weapon. Who are you? The man hesitated before answering. I'm from a nearby settlement. I've been watching you. Your group.
I know who you are.
Rian's heart raced. This wasn't just any stranger. The way the man spoke, the knowledge he had, it all pointed to something more.
What do you want?
The man glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if checking for someone. I was sent by someone who knows you. Someone who's been looking for the princesses. You're not as safe as you think you are. Rian's grip tightened on the blaster. Who's looking for them? The man shook his head. I can't say. But I can tell you this. They won't stop until they get what they want. Before Rian could respond, the man took a step back, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as he had come. Rian stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. The man had given him nothing but cryptic warnings and had vanished before he could get any answers. But the message was clear. The danger was closer than he had feared. Rian returned to the house, his mind heavy with what he had learned. He found Mira and Liana waiting for him by the fire, their eyes searching his face for any sign of what had happened. They know we're here, Rian said, his voice grim. We're not as safe as we thought. Mira's eyes narrowed. Who are they? Rian shook his head.
I don't know. But we need to be ready for anything. They won't stop until they have what they want.
The weight of the words hung in the air, and Rian could feel the tension rising in the room. The life they had built, the quiet refuge he had hoped to give the princesses, was beginning to slip away. They were no longer just survivors. They were targets. And Rian Garrow was determined to make sure they would never be caught. The days had grown darker, and the tension had built to a point where it seemed as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Rian Garrow had always known that peace was fleeting. But this was different. The stranger's warning had struck a chord with him. Whoever had been searching for the princesses, whoever was behind the threat, was close. He could feel it in his bones. Life on the ranch had become a constant series of preparations. Every morning, Rian made sure the princesses were trained in survival tactics, their lessons becoming more intense with each passing day. Mira, who had always been the more eager of the two, had grown into a formidable force. Her strength was now a weapon she could control, but she knew the value of patience and restraint. Rian had taught her the importance of thinking before acting, and although her fiery spirit often tested his patience, Rian was proud of her progress. Liana, the quieter one, had changed as well. Her once passive nature had evolved into one of quiet confidence. She didn't speak much, but her sharp mind and ability to understand situations before they fully unfolded made her invaluable. Rian had started to trust her instincts more and more, relying on her ability to sense danger before it became visible. She had a gift, one that was still growing, and though Rian didn't fully understand it, he knew it would be a strength they would need. The nights were the hardest. There was no moon in the sky, and the silence that surrounded them felt unnerving. Rian spent most of those nights awake, watching, listening for any movement outside the house, but nothing ever came, at least nothing that he could see. The darkness seemed to stretch out forever, hiding whatever threat was waiting in the distance. One evening, as the last of the light faded from the sky, Rian sat with the princesses by the fire inside the house. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room, and for a brief moment, the world seemed far away. But Rian knew it wouldn't last. They were too exposed out here, too vulnerable. "Rian," Mira said, breaking the silence, "do you think we'll ever see her again? The Queen, I mean." Rian glanced up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He could see the uncertainty in her expression, the same uncertainty that had been there ever since the Queen left for her campaign. "I don't know," Rian answered truthfully, "but I have to believe she'll come back." Liana sat silently beside them, her eyes distant, as if lost in thought. Rian couldn't help but notice the sadness in her gaze, the quiet longing for something she had once known. The weight of being the princess of an empire was heavy, but the weight of being a protector, of standing in the shadows of something greater, was even more isolating. Mira shifted her weight and leaned forward, staring into the flames. "I just wish things were different," she murmured. "I want to go back to how things were." Rian looked at her, his heart heavy. He understood her longing. She had known a life of luxury, of power and prestige. Now she was a soldier, a survivor, someone who was constantly on edge, waiting for the next threat to appear. "I know," Rian said quietly, "but you're stronger now. But stronger than you think." Mira didn't respond, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes was enough to tell Rian that she wasn't entirely convinced. They sat in silence for a while longer before Rian stood up, brushing the dirt off his pants. "We need to check the perimeter again," he said. "Keep your eyes open." As they moved outside, Rian couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with the kind of silence that came just before a storm. He had grown used to the feeling, but now it seemed more pressing, as if something was pushing against the quiet, ready to break through. The land around them stretched out, barren and wide, the darkness swallowing everything in sight. Rian's senses were sharp, his every step measured as he walked along the boundary of the ranch. Mira and Lyanna followed behind him, their footsteps barely making a sound on the dry earth. "I don't like this," Mira muttered under her breath. "It feels too still." Rian nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his blaster. "Stay alert." They continued moving, checking the traps Rian had set and inspecting the perimeter. Everything seemed normal, but there was something in the air, something Rian couldn't explain. It wasn't just the stillness. It was the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Rian froze, his heart racing. The tremor was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Mira and Lyanna exchanged worried glances, both of them sensing it too. "What was that?" Lyanna asked, her voice tight with unease. Rian's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. He couldn't see anything, but the feeling of danger had become undeniable. "Stay close," Rian ordered. "We need to get inside." They turned back toward the house, but before they could make it halfway, the sound of footsteps reached their ears. Rian stopped, his hand signaling for Mira and Lyanna to stay quiet. He looked around, his eyes narrowing as he searched the dark landscape. The footsteps were growing louder, and Rian could tell that whoever it was, they were moving fast. Mira's muscles tensed beside him. "Are we going to fight?" Rian nodded. "We're not running." Just as he spoke, figures emerged from the shadows. Tall, menacing figures dressed in dark armor, their faces hidden behind helmets. Rian's heart sank. These were not just random travelers. These were soldiers, trained, dangerous, and intent on something. "Get back to the house!" Rian shouted to Mira and Lyanna, pushing them forward. But before they could move, one of the figures stepped forward, raising his weapon. The air seemed to crackle with energy as a voice boomed from the shadows. "Step aside, Darrow," the voice said, deep and commanding. "We've come for the princesses." Rian stood firm, blocking the path to the house. "Not happening," he said, his voice steady. The figures closed in, their weapons raised, but Rian's stance remained unyielding. He could feel the princesses behind him, their presence a steady reminder of why he was fighting. One of the soldiers moved toward them, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You don't understand, Garrow," he said. "The Queen's rule is over. We've come to take what is ours." Rian's grip tightened on his blaster, his resolve hardening. "You'll have to get through me first." And then, all at once, the silence shattered. Mira lunged forward, her strength an explosion of power. The soldier who had spoken was caught off guard, thrown back by the force of her attack. Lyanna, though more reserved, stood beside Rian, her eyes alert, sensing the exact moment to strike. The battle had begun. Rian moved quickly, his training kicking in as he fought to protect the princesses. The soldiers were skilled, but they were not prepared for the ferocity of Rian and the princesses. Mira fought with the raw strength of someone who had nothing left to lose, while Lyanna's calm precision made her a deadly force in the chaos. The fight raged on, the land around them becoming a battlefield under the stars. Rian's mind raced, but his focus never wavered. He had sworn to protect these princesses, and nothing, no matter how powerful the enemy, would change that. As the last of the soldiers fell, Rian stood panting, his body covered in dirt and sweat. The princesses were safe, for now, but Rian knew this was only the beginning. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice low and steady. Mira and Lyanna stood beside him, their faces grim but resolute. They had survived the first wave, but they all knew that the real battle was yet to come.